If it's traumatic in a way, then you see those things you see with trauma. You see kids acting out, wanting to have more control. You see them being more anxious and more depressed, anxious in the moment, depressed later. You see substance abuse. Yeah, you see physical illness. You see because kids get really stressed and their immunity goes down. So you see all of those things. And I do think if the relationship between the parents isn't handled right, or if there's a neglect or abandonment, you'll see that in self-esteem and self-concept, for sure.
Move as slow and thoughtfully as possible, and that's not going to be the same for every family. There are some families where it has to happen quickly. But let's be thoughtful about it. Then you can deal with the losses better. You know, if you know, okay, I will eventually get back on my feet, or I don't need this, like it's going to be okay. You know, it doesn't mean you're not going to have feelings about it. I don't mean to dismiss like how complicated that is. But you know, it's the vulnerability and how insecure one can feel in these moments of profound loss and feeling alone, especially if you don't have a village. And
feeling rejected too,
feeling
potentially by the person who's,
you know, every
you.
family has their own story. And it's, you know, seeking help. Like, don't try to do it on your own. That would, in my mind, be a mistake.
We know that if it's traumatic in a way, then you see those things you see with trauma. You see kids acting out, wanting to have more control. You see them being more anxious, more depressed, anxious in the moment, depressed later. You see substance abuse. Yeah, you see physical illness. You see because kids get really stressed and their immunity goes down. So you see all of those things. And I do think if the relationship between the parents isn't handled right, or if there's a neglect or abandonment, you'll see that in self-esteem and self-concept, for sure. You know, or if there's a blaming, you know, if the kid blames themselves, you know, they'll feel really awful, they'll beat themselves up.
They couldn't figure out how to be, you know, married, but they still have to figure out how to be parents together.
The attitude that you described, you know, I'm confident that even if I'm, you know, that I'm going to land on my feet, that no matter what it's like now, that I'll get, you know, I'll have a good life again. That kind of attitude, I think, communicates something to the kids too. You know, it's, you know, you can really say to your kids, it will be fine, you know, we'll make sure it's fine for you. And mean it.
I mean, the kind of marriage someone has is often the kind of divorce you're going to have. So I always like to know, what are the problems they had in the marriage? Because we're going to have the problems here in the room.
So then do you recommend that for people who are going down that path, that they do seek out therapy?
Oh yeah, I do.
You
know, if you can get them to see the kernel of truth in the other person's perspective, because it's two perspectives that have interpreted a marriage differently. I don't necessarily need them to agree as much as I hope that they will try to understand the other person's perspective. And in doing that, sometimes if someone just feels understood, like I could see how you would feel that was disrespectful, or whatever the language that someone uses. If someone feels understood, like, oh, you could see how I feel that way. I don't need to be right, but you need to know that it's valid.
Feeling understood is key. I think.
To me, it is one of the top stressors you can have. You've got, somebody has to move out and be dislocated. Financially, you're strapped, usually, especially in the Bay Area. You know, so you have the whole, like, you know, quality of life, like what kind of you know, what can we afford to do that will be similar and look fair, even though the kids don't generally care, the parents care what it looks like. I can say something that one of the spouses have tried to say to the other, that they get to a fight over, and then for me they're like, oh, you know.
Well, and it also brings up another point, which is I think parenting's harder through divorce, not just because of the divorce, but because kids get kind of harder. You know, they're feeling really out of control. They're feeling like they're not getting a choice in this. And that is when a lot of kids, I mean, you may get kids who are like super compliant, really afraid of making any waves because they don't want things to get worse. But then a lot of kids, like in any situation where they feel like they don't have a choice, they're going to try to take that choice in other ways. And they're going to act out at school or hopefully at home.
Hopefully at home.
And so things maybe just at the time where you're feeling most like a part-time single parent, where then it's harder because the kids are really...
And you're still trying to take care of yourself well through all of that. I can imagine that being really hard.
Yeah. When people get caught up in the dollar signs and the concrete things, and those would be the try not to do that.
Yeah.
You know, try not to do that.
In general, do you think they do better or worse when they come to their own adult relationships? I can see it going both ways. I can see you learn from your parents' mistakes, and I can also see you absorb maybe toxic patterns. What are you guys seeing?
I mean, then it's this kind of general answer, like it really depends on the family.
On the family,
I mean, I really think that...
Well, also, I mean, can I add something real quick? It depends on the family. It depends on the generation. It depends on, like, there's what values, what it means. I mean, some people think a 10 or 15-year marriage is a really long marriage, and
I'm exhausted.
Yeah. And then some people, a 50-year marriage is what is successful. I mean, it kind of goes to the question of, like, sometimes it's somebody's greatest success to leave a marriage, instead of stay. I mean, it has to, to me, it's really hard to answer because there are so many layers. And especially with how, social media and all these things are playing into the younger generation's lives, and how they get together, and what does it mean to be in a relationship for them, even if they grew up in an intact home. I don't know. I think it's really complicated.
It's complicated. I mean, this is kind of what I was trying to say before, that I think the ideal, obviously the ideal is to have a wonderful marriage and to be able to provide that kind of togetherness for your family. Right. And that's not necessarily a choice here, though. I mean, if you have, if life is throwing that curveball at you, that something's happening that's making, or things are happening in the relationship that you couldn't have predicted, that get you to a point where you're considering divorce, then the choice isn't between this kind of happy marriage that you envisioned when you were, when you were getting married, and divorce. It's between something else and divorce. And so then the question is, how do you mitigate the bad effects of whatever that is? And I think, there's powerful stories of people really being inspired by, say, their mother walking away from an abusive relationship and getting divorced.
A family with two parents doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to have a family. Families look so different, and thankfully, there's lots of ways to do it. And I think it comes down to sort of how we hold our children in mind, and what that means.
Honestly expressing yourself without overburdening them.
Right.
And then the other side of that is kind of not sucking up to them so that you're the favorite parent.
Right.
Because I've seen this with children whose parents are kind of in fairly deep conflict as they get divorced, that they're each kind of trying to seduce the kid, right? In terms of who's kinder and who's has got more, has more fun. This one's got a puppy, and this one's got an Xbox, and ultimately, I that cannot be good for the child.
No, I mean, I think in a way it's a natural response. I work with a lot of families where someone's sick or someone's dying, and there's that temptation too, especially at the beginning. It's like, your father's dying, let's shower you with gifts. And kids, it's really hard for them, and they need stuff because they're going to have two houses and two. But I mean, I think kids are really sensitive to all that kind of unconscious communication and what that means, and whether they're being used for something rather than related to in terms of what their actual needs are. And it's very hurtful.
I think kids, they end up picking up on, I always caution parents to, try to not be the gift giver, try not to be the one that defames the other parent, because initially what will look like loyalty, or that you're getting what you want, even if it's on an unconscious level, I'm not saying it's malicious at all, eventually that's going to turn, and they're going to be very angry, because they're going to be put in the middle. And so it's really learning what's appropriate, what's an appropriate gift, and what, find someone else to complain about the other parent about.
This is Kamna from KaamnaLive, and this is your destination for BS-free conversations about all the things you care about. If you liked what you saw, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, potter around and see what else we have here, and of course, tell your friends. Cheers.